Ferrari, what are you doing? Let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risk all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen, for the first time ever, is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
Hello and welcome back to F1 in Review, episode 22. I'm Tristan Fancourt and I'm joined by Angus Gallager. You will note that it is me doing the introduction and not Tom. Tom is currently basking himself in Barcelona, of all places. Lucky old Tom. So you've got Angus and me to guide you through for the next hour to discuss what was quite an interesting French Grand Prix. I would say we had quite a lot of things going on. However, the big focus, I think, from many people, and particularly the Tifosi back in Italy, was Ferrari. Ferrari, what are you doing? Is the only way we could express ourselves politely in a radio-friendly format when you say, Angus. The words being thrown around on social media, Twitter and such like, seem to be a little bit stronger. And I think it all was culminated with that savage shot on the TV of a poor Ferrari fan sort of getting angry and weeping into his hands, whilst the Mercedes fan next to him was laughing and giggling at his friend, I think, rather than the crash that occurred, in which Charles Leclerc was leading the race and, well, just dropped the car into the barrier, and that was it. Which is a real shame, because if you go back an episode or two episodes, we posed another question on this podcast, which was, is the pendulum of Formula One swinging in the direction of Ferrari? Angus, I know what you said then, but what would you say now?
It's such a weird one, because I think your intro saying, Ferrari, what are you doing, sums it up, because the thing is, the pendulum, I think, is arguably still with them because their pace advantage. I mean, we saw this weekend, they are the fastest car in Formula One right now. Carlos Sainz came through the field from the back of the grid because of his engine penalty. He came through with ease, frankly. It was really, really simple. And he was up to 5th or 6th in no time at all. Leclerc was being pressured by Verstappen, of course, but he was holding himself pretty strong at the front of the field. You felt that even if he had to pit in a few laps after when he crashed, he would have come out behind Verstappen, yeah, because of the undercut, but you felt he would have had the tyre life and the pace advantage to get back past him. So they have the fastest car, and I think the next race as well, we'll look towards Hungary later, but it looks like it'll suit them because, twisty track, less straight, so less chance for Red Bull to take advantage of their straight line speed advantage. But when you have a team that's shooting itself in the foot so readily, I mean, the fact that we presumed at first that Charles Leclerc's crash was a mechanical fault, and then we hear later on he's just binned it. He's binned it himself. He's made the mistake, which, probably the first time this season that he's let the team down instead of vice versa. But yeah, just another way for him to find a way to mess something up. The strategy on the radio between Ferrari and the engineers and science, oh my goodness, where do we start? Mid overtake, mid corner. He was literally, and someone found online because with these radio messages it sometimes is delayed. Somebody found online, he literally got the message through as he was right up behind Perez and about to go alongside him. So they literally were talking to him mid overtake, just as the pit lane entrance is 100 metres away as well. And he's probably just like maybe on the road if you're like driving and then you're trying to concentrate and your mate next to you or the passenger next to you is trying to talk and you're just like, no, let me concentrate. That was a similar vibe. It was just, Carlos was just like, no, not now. And yeah, like the pendulum's with them, I think, still, because they have the pace advantage, like I said. But in a race where they should have got a 1-2, realistically, they come away with just 11 points and Red Bull have got 37. I think that says it all, really. So theoretically, the pendulum's with them, but they find ways just to not take advantage. It's quite incredible at this point.
Yeah, Ferrari certainly, I think, has perfected the art in losing championships. Really, since 2010, they've been getting very, very good at being in their own world, I think, and not considering maybe the best way to actually take some serious points. And I mean, Carlos Sainz is a completely different race, I think, to Charles Leclerc, and I'm sure we'll come back to him. I know we'll come back to him very, very soon. But for me, one of the things that I came away with from this race was yet another feeling that Charles, being this prodigy driver that's incredibly fast, but just isn't there to take the pressure yet. Perhaps he dropped the car into the barriers on lap 18, which isn't very long into the race. And yes, by this point, his tyres, he started on the mediums, his tyres after 18 laps and pushing quite hard to get away from Max Verstappen, who was bearing down on him, had taken a beating. But with the kind of lead that he managed to pull away, he said on Sky Sports that it was just his mistake. It was entirely his own fault, and this isn't the first time he's done it. Let's face it. Charles has a history of these problems, dating back through his a bad luck at places like Monaco, and he said afterwards that if Ferrari lose the championship by 37 points, then he will know why they lost. And it's a real shame because he has had these moments of I would say brilliance, when he's been able to take the pressure and keep pulling the car away into and even just going back 2 weeks to the last Grand Prix at the Red Bull Ring, he was basically nursing this car home and holding up to the pressure. So on one hand, we have that Charles Leclerc, the Leclerc which you look at and think, wow, you rival Max Verstappen, you rival Lewis Hamilton, you rival every other driver who we would say is at the pinnacle of their talent. I mean, even George Russell, Lando Norris, these are fantastic drivers. And then suddenly we get this Charles Leclerc, a Leclerc that on lap 18, without Red Bull behind him, because by this point on lap 18, Red Bull had pitted Max Verstappen. So that he didn't even have Verstappen behind him, pressurizing him into making a mistake. He did this all on his own. And when you see that, it makes you wonder whether or not Leclerc is in a place where he can cut it. Because it's one thing, right, having a team that's letting you down because the mechanical failures or poor pit stops, and yes, even bad strategy. But to counter that, you also have to make sure that you're on it every weekend. And the inconsistency from Ferrari is at this point, I think, looking like inconsistency from the team management perspective, but also, and I hate to say it because I'm a big Charles fan, inconsistency perhaps from their number one driver.
Yeah, it's the thing is with Leclerc, he's like he's I don't want to say he's an enigma, but it's been clear for many years he's been like so quick. Like we maybe talk about Verstappen, or people do talk about Verstappen as generational, and I think that's fair because he's come into the sport 17. He's been so good from an early age. He's breaking all sorts of records. But Leclerc as well, we forget, came in at the age of like 20 into that Sauber. He was I think the youngest driver to ever drive for Ferrari in Formula 1 history. Because don't forget, he had 1 year with Sauber, and then straight away Ferrari promoted him. Yeah. Like that's how good he was. And then all the times where, I mean, he basically not wiped the floor with, but he pretty convincingly beat Vettel, especially in that second year, a 4-time world champion. And I'd have to agree with this thing of like making mistakes and crashing. It is crept into him, but I think the previous couple of years we saw it more. But then if you remember that, especially that Ferrari in 2020, absolute dog, like 6th fastest car. Some of the results he was getting, he got a couple of podiums in that year, and you could maybe excuse the fact that from his point of view, basically the car is so poor that he has to wring its neck effectively, push it to the absolute limit, and he did that really, really well. And when it paid off handsomely. I think as well of that, was it Silverstone last year when Verstappen and Hamilton crashed and Leclerc was like genuinely in contention for victory despite having like the 3rd fastest car on the grid. That's an example of him like being just super rapid and just getting the absolute most out of a car because he's that good. And you see even this year, I mean, 7 pole positions so far this year out of 12 races. That's not to be sniffed at. He's a phenomenally quick driver. But when you have a record at the moment, as he does, of 16 pole positions, but only 5 wins, that really does like put in perspective some of the times. I mean, there are mitigating circumstances. Yes, things have gone wrong. For example, like that pole in Monaco where he crashed and then couldn't start the race. But even this year, 7 poles, 3 wins. That's not a brilliant record of conversion. And whilst you could maybe say cutting some slack because this mistake in France was his first... Well, actually, I say mistake. There's the one in Imola where he spun trying to chase down the Red Bull. Yep. So maybe the second mistake. But this, like, in terms of mistakes, this is a big one. Crashing out, losing 25 points. A big, big one. And you may think, is he ready for the championship? I think he's like... I never really subscribe to the view that someone's ready to fight for the championship because you kind of, with the way, I guess, life and especially Formula 1 is, you have to take the opportunity when it's there. Like Verstappen, last year, would you have said he was ready to win the championship? Well, you could say yes, but he was in a car which had the possibility to win the championship, and when the chance came his way, he took it in the end. So I think it's the same would apply to Leclerc, but he does need to... I think, to be fair, his brutal honesty is reassuring. To be so honest in public that he's made a mistake, I can think of lots of people who would not even try and hide it, but wouldn't necessarily be as honest as he is. And I think that's refreshing. But yeah, I mean, if the hard and fast, as he said himself, is if he's going to win the championship this season, he's going to have to change this like now. The change is going to have to come about now. But long term, I think there is still like there's still you can't not see him turning those mistakes into more more concrete performances and basically admitting those mistakes. There's a quote which I heard some years ago, which was used to describe Romain Grosjean. Don't know if you remember that year where Grosjean basically crashed on the first lap every single race, but all the way back, and he was clearly rapid, but he was just terrible in wheel-to-wheel contact. And the phrase I heard was, you can't make a consistent driver fast, but you can make a fast driver consistent. Now, it didn't work out with Grosjean too well, admittedly, but if there's anyone who's a fast driver, it's Charles Leclerc. So if they can hone that consistency and cut out those mistakes, then there is a serious, serious force to be reckoned with there. But it may still take time, but I think it's a possibility still that can be resolved for sure. Yeah, and to be honest, we know that Leclerc has had problems with his ability to cope with pressure, and he is getting coached at the moment by Jock Clear, who has worked with Ferrari, but he's also worked with other people like Carlos Sainz, and has been brought on by Ferrari basically to help Charles get up to speed and be able to cope with the pressure in a new way, because there is certainly another level to the Formula 1 drivers once they are at the championship fighting stage, and many drivers don't like it and do leave the sport. Nico Rosberg, for example, as much as we joke and laugh about him, who, by the way, he was hilarious during this weekend. He was called in to commentate, and he had behind him this big canvas of him in a Formula 1 car.
But we were told that he was on holiday. So I like the idea that Rosberg takes this canvas and his artwork of him everywhere he goes, and sort of, when he goes into this Airbnb, he's like, yeah, can you just put the canvas of me up there, please, so I can look at myself. But yeah, Nico Rosberg, as much as we joke about him, one of the reasons he said that he left Formula One after he beat Lewis Hamilton was because he didn't like the sort of person he became, and didn't like the fact that he was having to put in this massive amount of effort and basically get to this new level to try and beat this individual. You never know what that kind of pressure, that kind of, that determination for victory is going to lead you to. And I think it brings out the nasty side in people. It really does. We know it brings out the nasty side. And Hamilton and Rosberg's relationship has never survived. I'm actually quite surprised, Angus, if I'm honest, that Hamilton and Verstappen are, pretty amicable together, because last season was nasty.
It was intense.
Yeah, really, really intense. Go listen back to us commentating over it if you fancy, reliving that particular stress. So Charles Leclerc, he is having to get himself up to a new level. And to some extent, this is a weird time, because Leclerc, Verstappen, Norris, Russell, all those top drivers, they're all mates. They all share private jets, for example. Max Verstappen has his own private jet. They all get onto it and they call it Air Force Max. So they are, it's not just, you put in, yeah, but they do, and they're all mates, and they, like Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris go golfing together. Norris was with Max and and this weekend and things like that. So they're all mates. They all know each other. They're all living in Monaco, and so I think Leclerc hasn't necessarily got that massive pressure on him to step up to the next level that you need to be to beat someone like Max, to beat someone like Lewis Hamilton, that consistent driver. And Max does brilliantly with coping with pressure, especially in a difficult car. So I wonder whether or not at this stage Leclerc has to kind of reevaluate himself as a driver and try and coach himself to be into that next level, that, I suppose, bringing a bit of a more of an aggressive, nasty side out, and sort of split the racing him from, the casual Leclerc, so he can be, get to this stage where he can win. I disagree, Angus. I do think you do have to, elevate yourself to a new level to win the world championship. You don't do it from just, being sometimes Mr. Nice Guy, and perhaps this is the cause of the mistakes. So often it's self-confidence, and self-confidence often comes from an ignorance or an arrogance, a happy combination of the two, if you'd like. Ignorant from the fact that you might not be the best, and arrogance thinking you are. So I guess the last question, Angus, is, given the Drivers' Championship now, with Leclerc on 170 points, Max Verstappen on 233, that's a deficit of 63 points. Sergio Perez is only 7 points behind Leclerc. He's basically now, I think, fighting between Leclerc and Perez. Is Max now almost the default number one? Because we're one race off halfway through this season.
But basically, is it over? I'd love to say it's not, but I don't know. This reminds me of, it was whenever in the past few years you had a situation where Hamilton would be top of the championship and he'd be about this type of margin ahead in the championship, you'd go, well, with 10 races to go, is the championship over? And my initial thought would be, well, because it's Hamilton at the top, then yeah, probably, because he won't give up that kind of lead. And I get this similar aura from Verstappen. I think that, and I've made this point before about the impact of becoming world champion once can have on a driver. I remember I said seeing it with Sebastian Vettel back in the day. When he won his first world championship, he just cleared that hurdle and became unstoppable. I think Verstappen is showing the similar trait. He's won that first world title, and he's a missed himself. He's not bothered if he wins. He's won one. He doesn't care about how many more he gets. He'll keep racing for as long as it interests him, and he enjoys the environment he works in anyway. But when he wants to stop, he'll just stop. But you can just tell he's won that first, and you sense a greater maturity. You sense that he doesn't go for lunges or overtakes when he doesn't need to anymore. He almost, maybe because last year he felt he was trying to prove a point against a 7-time world champion, he went for things more and was more assertive and aggressive, whilst this year it seems that he's more relaxed about things. He just lets things come to him more. He doesn't, like, in that first 10-15 laps, he could have easily worn out the tyres more, trying to go for an overtake on Leclerc, but after about 10 laps he wasn't getting past, so he kind of just held back a little bit. Whether that was the effects of the dirty air, it might have been, but you sense just, he held back and was ready to go again later on in the race. And then, lo and behold, his main rival, under pressure of trying to increase more of a gap because of the undercut, his rival bins it in the wall. So, to answer the question, it's never over until it's over, as the old saying goes. But at the same time, Verstappen just has this aura that makes you think he's not going to give up a 63-point lead, surely not. I mean, he's got the commanding lead, he's got the cool head on the shoulders, and even if he doesn't have the fastest car, like, he just seems so in control, mate. He's just in control. The odd track is going to suit Red Bull over the reigning 10 races, you've got to admit. And I think as well the advantage he's got is that the stronger Mercedes get, the better it is for Verstappen, I think. Because it means that there is more of a fight for the podium places, which gives more variables in terms of, a Mercedes finishing ahead of a Ferrari or whatever like that, or vice versa. So it's looking pretty good for Verstappen. But I guess you never know until it truly is over. And I don't want to maybe call it until maybe 4 or 5 races to go, but it's looking pretty good for him. And Ferrari need to get their act together as well. Let's be real. They need to sort some stuff out too.
They definitely do. And to be clear, with the amount of points that sort of 63-point lead that Verstappen now has, well, Verstappen now can come second in over the next 7 races and still be in the lead. The only way I think personally that Max is going to lose this one is if he gets some DNFs. And to be clear, that's not unlikely. We are in a weird season. And last year we know how strong the comeback can be from the driver behind. But certainly I get this funny feeling that Ferrari isn't helping itself. And this was perhaps most evident in the race for Carlos Sainz. He was driver of the day this week, and I think rather fittingly as well, voted by you, the people. Carlos Sainz's weekend started off, well, okay. He didn't set the world alight, but we knew he was never going to because he was taking a full engine change back, and so would start on Sunday at the back of the grid. Sunday came along and Carlos Sainz, I think, has one of the best drives. He started on the hard tyre, which gave him a longevity advantage. But unfortunately, as much as Carlos Sainz was making his way through the pack, Ferrari would have other ideas concerning his ability to come in the top 5, top 4, top 3, and even take the win. With a safety car during the race, Carlos Sainz was given an unsafe release, giving him a 5-second penalty, which meant that he had to pull a 5-second lead out from the car behind in order to retain the place. Now, Carlos Sainz being on medium tyres after his pit stop meant that he had a pace advantage over the rest of the field, but alas, his tyres weren't going to last as long. So this left Ferrari in a very difficult situation. By lap 42 out of 53, Carlos Sainz's tyres were starting to get very, very old. And it was during an overtake on Sergio Perez for third place that Ferrari started saying to him, come in and pit. Which he eventually then did a lap later, dropping him right back down to 9th place. So Mr. Carlos Sainz went from 20th to 3rd before going back down to 9th, and then finally making his way back through the pack in the last 10 laps to take 5th overall, which I think we can all say it was absolutely amazing. Just one of the best drives I think we've seen from him all year. But Angus, again, was this Ferrari making the best out of a bad situation for Sainz? And were they right to pit him with only 10 laps left on medium tyres that were faster than anyone else?
You know what? I get the argument why people are saying that he shouldn't have pitted, because if you look at the facts, it wasn't helped by the safety car coming out earlier, and also the fact that the field usually, or not usually, but sometimes can get really strung out, so that if he'd made a pit stop, for example, the Alpine of Alonso, who was the highest up non-top 3 car, he would have been about probably a pit stop behind. But the combination of the cars not being strung out as much, and also the fact that the pit lane time at Paul Ricard was so long, it was like 30 seconds. And don't forget he had this penalty as well for the unsafe release. So because of that, based on that, you'd probably look at it and think, well, hang on, is pitting the right decision? At the same time, there was an image on about lap 40, a replay of his tyres. It was his front right or front left. I can't remember which one. Maybe it was both. Severe, like blistering, really blistering. So, and for those of you who are maybe newer F1 fans, what was blistering is when the tyre starts to wear away so much that the inside rim of the tyre basically starts to crumble away and leaves a big mark or a big line that looks like a cut in the tyre that suggests, that a puncture might be about to happen or be able to happen. So Ferrari have looked at those medium tyres, which are the quicker tyre but also the less durable, and they've thought, well, if he's doing 2/3 of the race distance on that, then surely at some point they're going to drop off and they're going to possibly puncture. And in their head, they must have thought, well, 0 points from a puncture is worse than, say, 10 points for dropping down to 9th and getting back up to 5th, as he did. But yeah, it's just, I think Ferrari got a bit too much. I say that earlier. I gave him a bit of stick for it, but they got, I think some stick is deserved because the stuff like, communicating with him mid-corner, like that's not ideal at all. But I think they were kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because if he stays out on these less durable tyres and he gets a puncture and he gets no points, everyone's going to go, oh, Ferrari, they're useless. Well, did they not see that it was going to puncture? Yeah. But because he's pitted and gone onto new tyres, and he's lost a couple of positions, they're going, oh, Ferrari, what have they done? Like, they've lost positions. I think, in an ideal world for Ferrari, the safety car, this is a very ideal world because the safety car was caused by their other driver crashing.
Yes.
But the safety car coming out kind of forced their hand, because if they don't pit during the safety car, they get track position, but they then have, when they pit again, the field will all be compressed and together again, and his pit stop maybe takes him down to 13th, 14th or whatever. So, and he'd already made good ground. He was up to 8th or 9th. He'd progressed in 18 laps. He'd really flown through the field. So I can see why, they did it, but the luck didn't fall their way massively. But with Ferrari, the way it is, they're going to get stick whatever they do at the end of the day. Especially if Sainz didn't sound best pleased with what was going on the radio. But I think, they made the best of the bad situation, I get, but they'll just be kicking themselves that they've had the weekend that they had. Admittedly, Matteo Binotto, team principal, sounding very optimistic. He was putting a brave face on things. I guess you have to do that when you're facing the media, but I don't think it was much of a strategy bungle as maybe people thought, but the aesthetics weren't great, and in this day and age, aesthetics matters as much as anything, apparently. So we'll just go with that, I guess.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I thought it was a little bit weird, actually, when we were, especially live, listening to the commentary, how the commentators were very, very quick to openly criticise Ferrari for what I think was banking points. Look, your second driver starts in 20th and has made their way up to the 3rd place. And yes, you're going to have a 5-second penalty at the end of it. on tyres that you don't know that can last to the end. If Carlos Sainz had gone to the end of the race on those tyres, those medium tyres, he would have gone further than others had gone on medium tyres before. So that's a grey area. And what I think Ferrari did was make the very sensible call, which is, we think we can get Carlos Sainz out on some new medium tyres, which will go to the end of the race and be faster than everyone else's hard tyres. We think he can make his way back through the pack. Yes, he won't be on the podium, but to be honest, you don't always have to go for the ultimate glory. If you go back to when we were talking about Mick Schumacher and how he wasn't able to get points earlier in the season, one of the things we said then was we wanted Schumacher to get maybe 11th place, then 10th place, and then he can start thinking about being a bit braver. But the point is, you need to bank success. And to be honest, Angus, you've hit the nail on the head there. If it all went wrong for Ferrari, and they had 2 retirements, or, let's say Sainz had a tyre blowout and he went all the way back in the pack and got no points, then we'd be sitting here saying, oh, Ferrari, they don't understand how to, be a successful team. How could they lose those incredibly valuable points that they're going to need for the constructors, given that the other drivers out of the race as well? And we can't say we can't say our other stuff in good faith, that drivers and teams need to really make sure they're banking good points and being consistent without being ourselves consistent, because we would be hypocritical if we said that Ferrari made the wrong choice here. Personally, I think they made the right choice here. Now, they didn't make the right choice in releasing Carlos Sainz. Let's be clear about that, into the Williams of Nicholas Latifi, I believe, forcing him to slam on the brakes in the pit lane. Right, that was bad. But after that, it's damage limitation. I think Ferrari did a good job on the damage limitation at the end of that. Carlos Sainz as well. One of the best drives I've seen from him. Absolutely stunning. Yeah. Brilliant speed. In fact, we're not even going to be able to cover this in this episode. But the other one I have to say is Kevin Magnussen at the beginning. At the first lap, covered 7 cars in the first lap. Caught up and overtook his teammate as well. Which, again, another fantastic drive. But Carlos Sainz, absolutely brilliant drive. Definitely showed what he could do. In fact, our prediction on the group chat before we started was either Carlos Sainz was going to be in the top 5, I think I said, which he was, or he was going to crash out early because he was going to be pushing as hard as he could. And, to be honest, if I said, Angus, which driver looked like the one that could challenge for the World Championship this weekend, which one would you have picked?
Out of the 2 Ferrari drivers?
Yeah.
Well, mate, Sainz was on it. I mean, it's such a shame that... I mean, talk about things in life being a cycle. The reason why this weekend turned out the way it did was because he had, that failure in Baku, and then later on down the line, that failure in Austria, which then led to the engine penalties. Made it such a shame because he was rapid. Like, it was at Q2 where he's gone out on the softs and he set a lap like a full 9/10 to 1 second quicker than everyone else. Like,
yes,
this was a weekend where, but for that, he was probably slam dunk for the win. Honestly, he was just on one.
Absolutely, and I think he looked like the World Championship driver this weekend. I mean, to be honest, the Red Bull team, Max won because he brought it home, obviously, but they just weren't as fast as Ferrari, and it's such a shame because, harking back right to the beginning of this segment when, Angus, you said you think the pendulum is in their side. Yeah, I think they are. I think it is. But it seems to be Ferrari they've got the momentum. They keep pointing it in the wrong direction. Going on now from Ferrari, thank you for sticking with us this long. It's taken us quite a while to go through both drivers. It was definitely a weekend where Ferrari's been the hot topic, but we can't forget everyone else that also took part in this particular Grand Prix, especially the 2 drivers that came in 2nd and 3rd. Pat on the back for F1 in review, I think, because last week we said that we thought that Mercedes would do quite well here. And turns out they did. 2nd and 3rd. First double podium this year. and it has not come soon enough. It was really, really good to see both Lewis Hamilton and George Russell on the podium. A completion of, I think, an ambition of Russell's, I think, to be standing alongside Lewis Hamilton. And what a better place to do it, really, because it was a fantastic drive for Russell. A last-minute, virtual safety car induced strategy play from Russell allowed him to dive down past Perez and take the lead with only 2 laps before the end. So, Russell really left it to the last minute, but he did in fact get that 3rd place. We won't have time to discuss what went wrong for Perez and whether or not it was right and stuff like that. You can go to Twitter for that particular argument, where I believe it's starting to get even more angry than it was yesterday, if it can possibly get that bad. So, Mercedes, yes, they're looking like they're getting stronger, getting faster. Their strategy seems to be better, and Toto Wolff is now on the radio with just a little bit of joy back in his voice. Nothing like 2015 to 2021. That's not the end, obviously. But I think Toto Wolff is no longer breaking his Bose headphones and pulling out his hair, and rather sipping some more champagne and. Yes, it's a bit more relaxed there, the Mercedes, as they're starting to iron out the particularly crinkles in their car. So, Angus, is Mercedes back on form now? Was this just a track which we thought that would favour Mercedes? Or are Mercedes now entering into the race? Perhaps not for the win this year, but for the long term, could this be a 3-horse race?
Oh, my lads, pour cold water on the Mercedes fire. I mean, I get if we look at the result, it's really, really good. Really, really good for them. I mean, first double podium this year, which is mad to say that for Mercedes, of all teams. But in terms of the comparison with the rest of the year, yeah, they've had podiums for sure. They've had lots of, and I'm looking at the graphic here on Wikipedia, there's lots of 3rd places for both drivers. But to get 2nd and 3rd on a weekend where I think the encouraging signs are, one, Hamilton overtook Perez at the start and kept him, after an initial period where Perez was all over him, he managed to keep him behind. And I admit Paul Ricard's a difficult track to overtake at, but he kept him behind and he really sort of managed to hold him off really, really well. Which we didn't expect, especially after practice, where Mercedes rocked up a full second slower than anyone else. So then they were like, "Well, what on earth's that about?" We didn't expect that. They really expected Paul Ricard to be a track they were strong at. They brought a couple of upgrades, as we discussed last week: smooth surface, long straights, rather than like too many and not as many slower corners as some other tracks. So we were of the opinion that, looking up, there was some high hopes for them. Also the fact that George Russell managed to get ahead of Perez, stick with Perez throughout the whole race. I know Perez had a bit, by his high standards, a bit of a stinker of a weekend. He was a bit off the pace all weekend, and he didn't do too great of a job. But Russell still managed to get past him at the end with that little, very tactically aware, or that tactical awareness that those great racing drivers possess. So there were lots of positive signs for them, I thought, and it's given them hope that it's almost the hope that on like a day, and this may be what their season comes down to, but on a day where Red Bull and Ferrari have a poor one, Mercedes need to be there to take advantage. They need to be. We think of those races a bit like ironically, with Hungary coming up, a bit like a Hungary last year, where both Red Bulls were taken out of the equation, both Mercs were taken out of the equation, and you had Esteban Ocon and Sebastian Vettel swoop in and take the lead for most of that race. You almost need a race where Red Bull and Ferrari have a poor one, or mitigating circumstances like collisions or mechanical failures intervene, and Russell and Hamilton would be there just to sweep through and take advantage. I still believe they can win this year. At the moment, can they win on pace alone? I'm not convinced, simply because they thought this track they'd be really strong at, especially in qualifying trim, and it didn't work out. I think there are tracks further down the line which would hold more promise for them. I'm looking at Spa at the moment. I think smoother track surface, long straights. I can't think of, other than the final corner and the first corner hairpin, there's hardly a single slow corner at Spa. And we think how well they went at Silverstone, which was a track with lots of fast sweeping corners. I think they're looking towards that perhaps as a beneficial one. I think in the immediate future, Hungary could be a bad one for them. It's a very slow track. I think they're going to struggle there. Even if Hamilton has, I think, I want to say 8 or 9 wins at the Hungaroring, which is like one of the most wins by a driver at any F1 circuit ever, possibly. So he has history there, and it is one of his stomping grounds. But I think it's positive signs for sure. But you then have to bear in mind, I guess, as well, that Leclerc wasn't there to take advantage. Sainz came from the back of the grid. So maybe, I think it's progress, but for their high standards, not enough progress. But I think, can I see them winning by the end of the season? Yes. May it take some external factor. When I say external factor, that makes it sound like aliens or something would have to intervene. But it's not going to be that. But could they win with possibly. But could they win with something happening going on in the background? Yeah, I reckon so. But on pace at the moment, not necessarily. But this weekend was promising. Still.
It was promising, and yes, okay. For the Mercedes fans out there, sorry that we are pouring cold water into your flamey weekend, and it was certainly one to remember. Don't worry, I've been there. I still look back at Monza last year when glorious McLaren managed to take the win. So this might be your moment of magic for this year, but what a moment of magic it was, definitely. Mercedes is certainly picking up the pace. Let's go with that. From a team that at the very beginning, were porpoising down the track and keeping up with Alfa Romeo, they have certainly come a long way. And to be clear, that's probably also because of the drivers. Mercedes have got 2 fantastic drivers. I mean, fantastic is probably the wrong word for Lewis Hamilton. A driver that some of you will call the greatest of all time, but we're not going to go into that debate particularly here. But let's face it, they've got one incredible driver, one of the greatest of all time, and George Russell, an up-and-coming fantastic driver as well. A driver that I'm sure will go on to some great successes. Both of drivers are pulling great times out the car. And we did think this would be a track that would favour Mercedes this weekend, with long sweeping corners and a few long straights here and there. Mercedes was certainly in their element. But I do get the feeling, and I ask this question, should Mercedes have come second and third this weekend? And before I pass it over to Angus, because I like the sound of my own voice, I'm going to give my 2 pennies on this particular one. I don't think they should have come second and third this weekend. Not really, if you consider everything else. The fact is, Mercedes, I think, got second and third this weekend because everything went wrong for everyone else. Sergio Perez was in third place, let's not forget, until the virtual safety car double message caught him, unawares, and George Russell was able to take advantage of that. Carlos Sainz had to have an engine change, which means he had to start at the back of the grid. I have a funny feeling Carlos Sainz was faster than both Mercedes if he was at the front. And then let's also not forget that Charles Leclerc crashed out of the race himself, leaving first place over to Verstappen. So all things being normal, I think Mercedes is certainly most comfortable in the 5th and 6th place, with the first 2 rows of the grid being given over to Red Bull versus Ferrari. And yes, I know what you're going to say. You say, but Tristan, you always say that you make your own luck and that this is the most important time. And you're absolutely right, Greg. This is the most important time. When everyone else is going wrong, you need to be fantastically consistent. However, it's important to mention that you can't take a race like this and apply it in general to the entirety of the season. This was a moment in which someone like Ocon, for example, wins a race, or Pierre Gasly wins a race. Those are a few standout moments throughout a season where something happens, the cards fall in the right way that allows you to get something fantastic. Let's face it, if Verstappen's engine had gone, if his tyres had gone, then Lewis Hamilton would have won. Right? They were only one place away from a victory. I mean, Russell nearly smashed it into Sergio Perez, taking both of them out, and that fight had me on edge a little bit. So, in my opinion, Mercedes fans, enjoy it, lap it up, take solace knowing that Mercedes is getting faster, that their porpoising issues are slowly getting eroded away, and with it a car that is drivable without breaking the back of their 7-time World Championship driver. But also, don't get overly excited, would you say, Angus? Because it's not necessarily reflective of their overall performance. I still think they're 5th and 6th.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I think even Hamilton himself admitted, I think the way he phrased it was Red Bull and Ferrari are just way ahead at the moment this year. Or he said like 2 teams have produced phenomenal cars and they are third best. And it's not like they're not gasping for air. They are comfortably third best. They've got like 3 times the amount of points that Alpine have. Even if sometimes they have races where they maybe slip back into that Alpine-McLaren battle. And like you said at the start of the season, they were kind of around about where Alfa Romeo were on pace. But I think that, 5th and 6th is their current like hunting ground. It's where they're there almost to take advantage of opportunities that might fall their way. I think it's being made to look better this year by the fact that there have been a lot, this is possibly something to discuss further down the line, there have been a lot more reliability-based retirements this year with the new cars. And sort of like last year you'd see maybe 1-2 retirements a race tops, but this year lots of races producing. I mean, this race, Paul Ricciardo, only 15 of the 20 cars finished, and that's becoming more of a regular theme. So, like, I think that's a factor, but at the moment, I agree. They are the third fastest team, and they are there to take advantage of opportunities that come their way. And until they get more pace or until they take advantage of something, they're not going to be progressively and consistently up there. And it's almost at the point of the season where you get to this stage and you're like, right, what stage do we focus on the next season and maximising that potential? Just like Ferrari, by the way, this time last year, and despite we joke about their pit stop troubles and everything, they produced a flipping fast car. So they turned away their attention halfway through last year to this year. So at some point, do Mercedes consider that? But at the moment, third fastest team still, without a doubt.
When do you think they will move on to prioritising next year's car? Where in I suppose the second half after the season? Sorry, no, let's not say those words. Hold on, I need to just pause it for like 10 seconds. Where in the second half of the season does Toto Wolff call it a day? Toto Wolff, by the way, is just sitting from the sidelines commentating on Christian Horner. I don't know if you saw that he said that Christian Horner must be getting rather bored at the front, given Red Bull's current performance. But where do you think Mercedes draw the line?
I guess, to be honest, you can make an argument. You can make an argument and say they draw the line now. Some would say, because the thing is now, though, I mean, they're only 44 points behind Ferrari. Because Ferrari continue to shoot themselves in the foot in some ways, they're closing up on Ferrari. So some would say that second place is there for the taking in the constructors. I disagree, because I think mitigating factors, like I've said, have meant that gap was closed. But like maybe if you get a couple of races after the summer break, Belgium, Holland, and maybe after that you go, well, we're still third fastest team. We'll focus on the next one. But to be honest, knowing a team with Mercedes resources, I know there's a budget cap, but still with their resources, arguably they're probably focusing on 2023 already. That's probably in the pipeline, as any team with good preparation would do anyway. But yeah, it's almost getting to that stage where they might have to forget 2022 existed. Move on. Don't live in the past. All those lovely cliches.
Yes, and we like bringing them up because they do key us into the future, I think, and especially right now we know it can take a team forward quite considerably if you refocus your resources in an efficient manner. Haas, for example, has demonstrated wonderfully what it means to basically throw a season away in Haas's case, and to prioritise next year. So perhaps Mercedes, in a weird turn of fate, will take a leaf out of Haas's book. Let's go with that. And prioritise next year so that their 7-time World Championship champion, or even George Russell, might well take their first win. But another team that's been, I suppose, been moving up the field since the beginning of the year is McLaren. A team that I was incredibly disappointed with at the very, very beginning because of their, dog of a car that was in last position. And a car that's now sort of taking 7th and 9th place. McLaren brought the most upgrades to France, the French Grand Prix this weekend, and it seems to have paid some dividends for them. What do we think of McLaren's current performance? Slow and steady, or again just able to capitalise on the woes of everyone else around them?
I think the upgrade has helped. Definitely, they brought this weekend. Has it helped Daniel Ricciardo be not slow? Jury's out on that one. Sorry, Daniel. But I think it's helped them because they have closed up. I feel like they closed up to Mercedes this weekend, especially in qualifying. I thought Lando Norris's lap to get in between the Mercedes, absolute stonker, by the way.
Yeah.
What a lap. Doesn't get talked enough about perhaps how good he is, but I think he's like, stick him in a Mercedes when Hamilton retires, and you got Russell and Norris and Mercedes, and that is a hell of a lineup. Yeah. But yeah, they bring that upgrade, and they go quicker, and yet they score fewer points than Alpine across the weekend. It's an interesting one. I think a lot of that is down to Fernando Alonso having a brilliant start and managing to hold the fort in 6th place. I loved his radio message where Alonso was like, his engineer was like, "Oh, Norris is just 1.5 seconds behind," or something like that. And Alonso goes, "Yeah, I want to be closer. I want to kill his tyres." Brilliant radio message. A wily old man. Still, I mean, the fact he's still performing to this level at 40 and he's 41 on Friday is like crazy. But yeah, back to McLaren. They have closed the gap, it seems, to Mercedes. Not that that's their aim. I think at the moment their aim is fully to focus on beating Alpine.
Yes.
But yeah, weird weekend where they had an upgrade, looked faster, yet came away with less points. And whether that bodes well for the future, I don't know, because it shows that Alpine perhaps made the most out of their weekend, even if they had a more of an off weekend. It'll be interesting to see how that works going forward. But I think that with McLaren, as long as they got Norris, they got a great chance. I think he's just very consistent. He brings home the points regularly. They just need Mr. Ricciardo to step up a bit more and show his worth, because we've said it before, he's very good, he's shown in the past, but it's been a year and a half now and he's still lacking. He's still not stepping up massively. He's got 19 points this year and Lando Norris has 70. Like, that is a huge gap. Norris has almost, what's that, 4 times the amount of points? That's a massive gap. So imagine if they had 2 drivers who are performing at that level, they'd be streets ahead for 4th place. But yeah, interesting one with McLaren, because like I said, their upgrade improved them, but when only one of their drivers is producing the goods, it doesn't help as much, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I mean, by the rumours that are circulating around the paddock about Ricciardo's potential replacement, I think next year McLaren might well be bringing 1 Formula 1 car and 1 London bus to each race, given the amount of potential drivers that they might have going into the 2023 season. Although Ricciardo and McLaren has said over and over again that it will be Ricciardo racing for them next year. But if other team, Red Bull, are anything to go by, those are just words. And remember, contracts can be broken if you have the right lawyers and a lot of money, both of which McLaren certainly do. This weekend was a very interesting weekend because I feel like it was two halves for McLaren. On one hand, you absolutely did have an amazing qualifying performance from Lando Norris. He got a 132.032 in qualifying in Q3. I know that's just a number, but that means he was only 2.4 tenths of a second off Lewis Hamilton for P4, and he beat out George Russell in the other Mercedes by a good tenth of a second as well. He beat a Mercedes by a tenth of a second. That's very, very good. Worryingly, he was 2 seconds. It was 1.2 seconds off of the lead, which just demonstrates how fast that Ferrari is and Charles Leclerc's absolute speed around this track. I mean, that was a nut slap from Charles Leclerc. I don't think we've mentioned that just yet. So on one hand, we had this fantastic qualifying performance from Lando Norris, which unfortunately wasn't necessarily matched all that well by Daniel Ricciardo, who could only get 11th. And then going into the race, I feel like this is where Ricciardo comes back a bit, because he seems to actually be able to have the race pace to help, well, the rest of the team. But is it enough? Is it enough that Lando Norris gets the key points? As you say, Angus, 4 times the points of Daniel Ricciardo, and then Daniel Ricciardo has to sort of hoover up the rest, especially when we've got this Alpine versus McLaren battle. Alpine is now ahead of McLaren by 4 points. It's very, very tight. So if you're McLaren, are you going to get rid of Daniel Ricciardo? That's the question. Now, are they bringing these upgrades? They seem to have a qualifying pace. And yes, the race didn't go quite so well. Certainly, Alonso is a formidable opponent, hard to get past. Lewis Hamilton this week called Fernando Alonso his greatest opponent, which is one hell of an accolade. And I'm sure Nico Rosberg took great offence to that. Yeah, he's seething. But Alonso aside, is it time that Ricciardo was given the boot?
In a word, yes. I think that, in my opinion, I was thinking about this earlier. Have McLaren have signed like all these young IndyCar drivers as well to like different contracts. So Pato Award and Alex Palou is one they signed recently. I think Lando Norris has been in the sport. It'll have been 4 years at the end of this year. Give him the team leadership role. I think he's ready for it. He's proved himself more than worthy of competing against Carlos Sainz, one of the best drivers in Formula 1 right now. And he's also convincingly beating Daniel Ricciardo, who previously was one of the best drivers in F1. Give Lando Norris a team leading role and blood one of these young IndyCar drivers who are clearly very good in their other discipline and see how they get on in F1. I think that's a plan, because right at the moment, they're losing out to an Alpine team who have Esteban Ocon racing at a very high level, Fernando Alonso racing at an even higher level, and only just starting to get luck come his way. So when he gets that luck, they could golf in the distance away from McLaren. So, like you said, they've got enough money and the lawyers to get rid of him. So I would, to be honest. Fresh start.
And so ends episode 22 of F1 in Review. Thank you so much for getting to this point in the podcast, if you stuck with us all the way to the end. If you are enjoying the season so far, please rate our podcast and share it as well. That would be doing us a fantastic favour. Now, going into this weekend, we do have another race. Yes, it is race week. Thank goodness for that. The last race before the summer break. You can catch qualifying at 3 p.m. on the Saturday, and the race itself will be at 2 p.m. Fingers crossed that Hungary is as good as it was last year. And if you're bored and you haven't seen last year's race, go watch that. Get yourself prepared for what could be, because Hungary does have the opportunity to show up some excellent racing right there. Now, you can, of course, follow F1 in Review on Twitter. That is at F1 in Review, as well as myself or Tom Clabon as well, if you fancy seeing what we're doing individually. Tom will be back with us next week, so if you've missed him, don't worry. The sweet sound of Tom's voice will be broadcast over the airways this time next week for your listening pleasure. But until then, thank you so much for listening to F1 in Review. We will speak to you next time.